So today, grade 9s, we're going to look at some disadvantages and advantages of both types of reproduction, asexual and sexual. Believe it or not, that each type has its own advantages and disadvantages. So there's good things and bad things to both. We're going to have a look at them. So in terms of asexual reproduction, it has lots of advantages. When we're talking about asexual, remember it's only one parent and the offspring are clones. So there are, even though you're making identical copies all the time, there are advantages to this. Because your offspring are completely identical to the original parent, this can be actually pretty good if the parent organism is actually very well suited to that environment. So I used the example of bacteria before in class, because if you are a strong bacteria, you're resistant to all the antibiotics and drugs out there and any medications, you can survive those things. Well, if you clone yourself, then so can your offspring. So you can make more bacteria, and your offspring will be more likely to survive as well, because they'll likely be resistant to all the drugs and medicines as well. The other thing is, it's really simple. Asexual reproduction, you don't need to find a partner. You don't have to go spend energy trying to find a mate. You can basically reproduce whenever you have to, or whenever you feel like it. So you can create offspring just by cell division or releasing spores or whatever. You don't actually have to find or wait for another organism to come along, another member of your species. Or you don't have to wait for, for example, a bee to cross-pollinate your flowers in order to produce fruits, things like that. So you don't rely on anyone else but yourself. Also, since asexual is quite simpler, it's also much quicker. Some cells can reproduce in minutes. Bacteria cells, they grow by the thousands and thousands within a day. It's crazy how fast they can grow. So you can produce lots of offspring in very little time. And the other thing is, since there's only one parent, and the parent probably is gone, they're not taking care of their offspring. The offspring are usually able to survive by themselves. So offspring, there's no energy having to be put into taking care of the kids. Now, this sounds like it's pretty simple and pretty easy, and there's lots of advantages, but there's also some very major disadvantages to asexual reproduction, or reproduction with just one parent. And the key is that there's no genetic variation. So there's no chance for adapting to your environment, no chance for evolution, no chance for the species to get stronger and better, because if the species is only made through cloning, then all the offspring are identical. So if there's one thing that can wipe you out, that can wipe everybody out. The other thing is, sometimes there is only one parent to care for those offspring, so that will actually lower the chances of survival of the offspring. So if you don't have someone to take care of the babies are fending for themselves, they might not make it. And the big one, and this has to go back to the genetic variation, is that your species, whatever species you are, has a risk of it going extinct because of a catastrophe. Irish potatoes in the 1840s was an example. They became overrun by a disease. They ended up looking like this, and it's called the potato famine, because people were starving because they couldn't eat. There was lots of poverty at the time. Potatoes was like a major staple of the diet in Ireland, and people couldn't afford to eat much else, and all the potato crops were wiped out, and that type of potato basically was gone. Because all the potatoes were clones of this one type, and because it got this one disease that killed that one type of potato, all the potatoes got it. This also happened with bananas. There's actually another type of banana. Like the bananas that we are used to today taste a lot different than what another type of banana was back in the 40s. And the reason why those bananas don't exist anymore is because they got a blight as well, a type of disease, and because they were all clones, that whole variety of banana has disappeared. It's gone because of one virus or one bacteria. So if you're a clone, you can't adapt and you can't change your genetics and vary your genetics to protect yourself from going extinct due to things like disease. Now, sexual reproduction obviously has lots of advantages, and it's basically the opposite of asexual. The major advantage is that we have traits from both our parents. We are genetically different, and that allows us to adapt. We can end up with better genes than our parents did, and and sometimes we can end up with worse genes than our parents did. But for the most part, we can adapt to our environment, especially in the animal kingdom, that allows us to adapt and evolve and become more suited to our environment. So the strongest organisms, strongest animals will survive, and they will have babies, and ideally those babies would be stronger, and basically they keep adapting throughout history. The other thing is, when you have sexual reproduction, if the parents are required to take care of the offspring, in which there are many cases, you have two parents that can do that. You know, like with birds, a mother might stay at the nest while the father goes and gets, hunts for food or finds food. With ducks, the same idea. All sorts of organisms. One parent will stay with the babies, and the other parent will go and hunt for food and try to feed the babies, and vice versa. So there's a shared responsibility there. What was the other one? Oh, and then genetic variation also ensures that there's a higher survival rate. So lots of times we are not susceptible to one disease wiping us all out. Some people are more immune to a disease than others. I mean, you just look at the COVID issue right now. Some people get it, but they don't really get symptoms, but some people get it and it really hurts them. So depending on your genetics, you might actually have something that keeps you from getting too sick from it. So you're more likely to survive that disease or that virus than somebody else. So having variation is a good thing, because if we're all the same and COVID hurts one of us, it will hurt all of us. Now, there are some disadvantages. It does take time. You have to find a partner. We need to have male and female gametes. If you're a pumpkin, you need to have a bee transmit pollen from one flower to another, from a male flower to a female flower. And you're relying on that bee to actually come by and do that. So there's time, there's energy, there's stuff that has to happen, right? We're humans, you have to find a mate. You have to find somebody that you're actually going to have children with. You can't just have children all by yourself. Results of meiosis. Now, and we saw this in class, meiosis is very, very complicated. There's a lot of things that could go wrong. Also, even just trying to fertilize the egg, that's very complicated. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. There's lots of people out there that have a very difficult time getting pregnant for very, very huge number of reasons. So there's lots of unpredictable parts to this. So that could actually cause it to be a disadvantage. It's hard to reproduce sometimes. There's lots of chances for errors and mutations and all sorts of things. The other thing is you have to have ways to attract that other partner. You actually have to have ways to attract that mate and fertilize them. And then there's also organisms out there that actually have taken advantage of this, of using sexual reproduction. So if you go to health class, we talk about STDs or STIs, sexually transmitted infections. Those are bacteria and viruses that have taken advantage of the fact that humans need to reproduce sexually so that they can actually thrive. They're using that sexual reproduction that we perform to actually infect more people and keep their virus or bacteria surviving. So there's another disadvantage, is certain types of disease and bacteria and parasites that can actually infect us because of the way we reproduce. So there's lots of advantages, lots of disadvantages to both. Ultimately, the biggest part is the difference between variation and cloning. And cloning, in terms of evolution and adapting, is not as it's not as good in terms of being able to adapt. Okay, that's it for today.